All right, let's jump straight in. Today, we're unpacking something truly mind-bending. We are looking at the sheer brilliance of the 2nd century Buddhist philosopher Nāgārjuna. Specifically, we're zeroing in on the first 3 chapters of his absolute masterpiece, the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Now, fair warning, by the time we wrap up this explainer, your intuitive grasp of reality, how things move, how causes create effects, even how you're perceiving this very screen right now, it's going to be completely shattered and beautifully rebuilt. Because we're diving into a reality that is fundamentally entirely fractal. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our intellectual map for today. We'll start by defining the centerless fractal reality, then walk through Chapter 1 on causality loops, Chapter 2 on centerless motion, and Chapter 3 on perception cycles. Finally, we'll put it all back together by looking at the theory of a coreless cosmos and what this actually means for living the fractal. Starting with Part 1, the centerless fractal reality and breaking the linear illusion. To really get Nāgārjuna, we have to fundamentally shift how we see things. We usually operate on a pretty linear view of the world, right? We think in straight lines, a static path from point A to point B, absolute beginnings, absolute ends. But Nāgārjuna argues that reality actually functions as a limitless, centerless, fractal karmic cycle. Every single process in our universe is an oscillating loop of interdependence. The end of one cycle instantly, and I mean instantly, forms the beginning of the next one. There's no true continuity, but there's no true discontinuity either. It's just reality, continually oscillating between poles. Let's move to Chapter 1, Causality Loops, and see how this builds. So Nāgārjuna breaks causality down into 3 mutually conditioning spheres: the cause, the causality itself, and the effect. Normally, we'd think a cause generates an effect, and boom, end of story. But actually, that result feeds straight back into the origin. Think of it kind of like a microphone screeching in an audio feedback loop. The effect literally becomes a brand new cause, what we can call cause 2, for the very next cycle. Because these opposites mutually create and condition each other, there's literally no absolute first cause and no absolute final effect. It is an endless, centerless cycle of continuous karmic updates. But that brings up a really provocative question. If causation is just this endless, centerless feedback loop without a true beginning or end, what is actually happening when we try to physically move through space? Like, how do we actually get from point A to point B? Well, let's look at Chapter 2, Centerless Motion. Just like causality, motion is a mutually conditioning cycle. We've got 3 spheres again: the goer, the going, and the destination. A goer initiates movement and arrives at a destination. But, and here's the catch, arriving isn't some permanent endpoint. It immediately updates the actor. The subject at the destination becomes the subject at the origin in the very next cycle. So the goer is actually an illusion. They are in constant flux, continually redefined by the destinations they reach. There is no independent, fixed mover outside of this process. These spheres only exist because they continually condition one another. Okay, so if the goer is just a temporary, fluctuating node in a cycle of movement and nothing actually moves independently, who or what is doing the observing? Who is actually watching this explainer right now? That takes us right into Chapter 3, Perception Cycles. Here, Nāgārjuna completely deconstructs our internal experience into a 3rd triad: the perceiver, the perception, and the perceived object. Imagine you encounter a world. Let's say you're scrolling through an incredibly frustrating algorithmic social media feed. That encounter generates immediate cognitive updates. The observed, the known, literally becomes part of the observer's karmic framework in the next infinitesimal moment. You are fundamentally altered into perceiver 2. And then this newly updated angry perceiver projects a newly conditioned, hostile world right back out. It's wild. It is a completely co-creative, illusory loop where the perceiver and the perceived are just constantly conditioning one another. So the crucial point is, well, let's look at Part 5, Theory, a Coreless Cosmos. This all culminates in a really heavy, profoundly important philosophical concept: the union of the 2 truths. Nāgārjuna states that phenomena are entirely empty of absolute, independent reality. Why? Precisely because they are dependently co-arisen. A goer only exists because of going. A perceiver only exists because of a perceived world. That emptiness is the ultimate truth. Yet they function perfectly on a conventional level. Basically, reality is a relational flux. It works for us conventionally every single day, but ultimately, it's completely ungraspable. Let's do a cosmic zoom out for a second, because this reality is a centerless fractal cycle. Those rigid boundaries we constantly draw between inside and outside totally dissolve. The individual isn't a solitary independent agent. We're just a momentary intersection of these causal, locomotive, and perceptual cycles. The collective, that's just individual karmic actions rippling out to become environmental conditions. And the cosmos itself is just the totality of this interdependent, co-emerging dance. The individual, the collective, the cosmos. They all co-emerge together without any inherent separation whatsoever. Which brings us to part 6, practice, living the fractal. Now, you're probably wondering, what does a centerless, coreless, oscillating reality actually mean for me tomorrow morning? The sources use some incredibly striking imagery here. They say the cycles are like illusions, reflections, mirages, dreams, echoes. There, yet not there. Since the observer is constantly being updated by what it observes, all those solid distinctions we draw in our daily lives are really just mental imputations. We're constantly projecting our conditioned minds onto the world, mistaking our own continuous, oscillating fabrications for solid truths. The world is a karmic mirage. It functions, sure, so it's there, but inherently it is not there. And this brilliantly illustrates how we can actually live in this framework. Think about it. Suffering happens when we try to permanently freeze a perceiver, or when we desperately try to grasp a destination that is actually just another beginning. The moment we stop grasping at absolute solidity, liberation happens naturally. It allows for what we call acting without acting. We can plan our days, travel, interact conventionally, but completely drop the heavy burden of absolute attachment to the outcomes. Plus, if the perceived world is continually updating the perceiver, then others aren't fundamentally separate from me. This realization naturally gives rise to boundless compassion, because the suffering of the world is, quite literally, inseparable from your own self. I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on as you go about your day. In a limitless, centerless fractal reality, there is no ultimate endpoint, and there's no permanent self to carry over some imaginary finish line. Every effect is a new cause. Every destination updates your starting point. So, if every single destination is really just a new beginning, where are you rushing to? Thanks for exploring this mind-bending explainer with me. Catch you on the next one.